My name is Ricky Riccardi. And speaking of cholesterol,
Yeah,
Mr. Jerry Roche.
a great New Orleans breakfast.
Yeah. We are thrilled to be here. We were here last year talking about Dot Time and this Louis Armstrong Legacy series, and I represent the Louis Armstrong House Museum. Jerry represents Dot Time Records, launching the release of this newest volume live in Europe, which right now the only place you can get it on the planet is
Louisiana Music Factory.
So yeah, so after here, we'll make a second line right down, and
They just got them like an hour ago.
yeah, they knew we were coming. Jerry, why don't you tell the good folks a little bit about Dot Time and how we got here?
Well, we started a series, Legends series, with Ella Fitzgerald, and after we put the first volume out, I was at home listening to Ella and Armstrong, thinking, just kind of relaxing and thinking about where we could go from there. And then it was a natural progression to talk to Ricky, since I had worked at Mosaic with Scott Wenzel, and it was just a real simple introduction, and we just started talking about all the hundreds of hours of unreleased material just sitting there waiting. And we put out the Standard Oil sessions first, which was initially supposed to be on the radio, and then we did what I think is a fantastic one, which is the nightclubs, where Ricky and I listened to hours and hours and cherry-picked like some of the greatest music that he did live at nightclubs, where he could kind of let his hair down and just kind of blow. Mm-hmm. So that's a really Armstrong-centric release. And then we did something completely different, where we put out a whole show of Sparks, Nevada, and it's the first recording in his collection of Hello Dolly, right after it had become #1 and knocked Can't Buy Me Love by the Beatles out of #1 for a big 1 week.
Hey,
What
a week.
And then Ricky and I started thinking about where we could go from there, and we tried to do South America, but there was some sound issues, and then it's like, let's go to another continent. And
you also check the sales reports, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Louis Armstrong's very big in Europe.
Yes, yeah.
So
we decided to listen to many hours of Armstrong, and we culled so far this, which is 2 shows from France when he first returned to Europe after the war in '48, and then a show that's kind of near and dear to his heart, which is October 12th, 1952 in Berlin.
Yeah, just to give you guys the full background, if you don't know, the Louis Armstrong House Museum, we have the world's largest archives for a single jazz musician. And some of you might know about Louis's tapes. The man loved tape recording himself. Anything from telling the dirtiest jokes imaginable to arguing with his wife to getting high. It's all on tape. His whole life is on tape. So I'm not joking. But a lot of people, they gravitate towards that, and my research is based on that. But the man was also recording his own concerts, and the musicians in his band, when I interviewed them, they always said that they would sometimes play a show, go back to their hotel room, and they would hear that night's show coming out of the speakers. Armstrong was listening to it just an hour later. So we have so many hours of broadcasts and concerts and everything just in Louis's collection, but we've gone on, we've collected, we have 12 collections of all Armstrong material. And the basis for this collection was actually 2 Europeans who I've gotten to know very well. One was a man named Justa Hagloff. And Hagloff, he was a banker by day. He was never a musician, but any hour of the day he wasn't at work was dedicated to Armstrong. He once told me that he never got married because no woman was going to put up with his level of Armstrong worship. No joke, this man got a sweat-stained Armstrong handkerchief and put it behind glass in a frame, and we have that at the museum.
That's obsession.
It's gross.
Yeah.
But in 1971, Justa produced a tribute to Armstrong, and he sent the album to Louis, and Louis really enjoyed it, and he had his photo taken with the record, and he wrote a letter and he thanked him, and he said, "Keep up the good works." And that was all Justa needed to hear, that this became his life's mission. And between that moment in 71 and his death in 2009, he amassed one of Europe's, I think, greatest collections of all Armstrong material. Inadvertently, he also acquired my entire collection because we used to trade all the time. So in 2009, after he died, he left his entire collection to the Armstrong House. Our longtime director, Michael Cogswell, had to go over to Sweden, pack up the entire collection, bring it over, and it was kind of a trip, a personal trip. Seeing all of my handwriting, all my stuff came right back to the source. But in that collection were probably more hundreds and thousands of hours of unissued Armstrong performances, most of them in Europe, a lot of Scandinavian countries, places like that. So when Jerry came to me and said, "What do you have Armstrong in France?" I said, "Let's hit the Hageloff collection." So we listened to concerts mostly from 1948. Then the first actual jazz festival, ever jazz festival of all time, was the Nice Jazz Festival in February of that year. And it was an important time for Armstrong. In 47, he had just eliminated his big band. He formed a small group, the All-Stars. And people came and gone over the years, and some later groups might not have been all stars. But the first group, my goodness, he had Big Sid Catlett on drums, and Arvell Shaw on bass, and Jack Teagard on trombone, and Barney Bigard on clarinet. And the original pianist was Dick Carey. They wanted Earl Father Hines. They couldn't get him. But finally, by January 48, Father Hines was signed up. And this was like the great reunion. 1928, Armstrong and Hines made all the recordings that changed jazz history. Now they're together in a band playing 300 nights a year in 1948. It's incredible. So their real coming out party was this Nice Jazz Festival. And so we picked multiple broadcasts, 2 different broadcasts, back-to-back, February 22nd, February 23rd. And should we just dive in, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hit it.
Just to give you an idea, I mean, you can only also imagine, I'm not checking my email, you could also, but while I'm here, no, you could imagine what it was in the jazz world. Again, I worship Armstrong's big band work. I'm writing about it. My next book is about the big bands, but there was always a segment of the jazz community that never forgave Armstrong for going back, getting away from his small group New Orleans roots. And so here he was back with the whole trumpet, trombone, clarinet front line, and with this incredible, incredible band. And we're going to dive right in, live in Nice, France, 1948, Panama. Yeah.
Even though Ricky and I played that on WWOZ earlier, it's just we can't stop listening to it. So, but for us at Dot Time, and for me when producing it with my engineer Lou Jimenez, it's really important. Even though you hear some air and some space, it's important not to roll off the sound of the musicians. I'd rather have it sound a little more raw than take anybody's instrument off and roll it off that way. So I hope you guys appreciate that, because there's other people who don't do that and they peel away. And it's like, how could you take away Armstrong's trumpet or Arvell's bass on either side? And so we try to keep it as energetic to the recording as possible.
Amen. We want to play one more track from this French material. So Armstrong, his first time in Europe was in 1932. Then he went back in July of 33, and he stayed there until January of 35. He was there for a year and a half, but then he came back and did not return until February of 48. In 35, the summer of 35, he hired Joe Glazer to be his manager. So Joe Glazer had never been on any of those European tours. Now they're going over to France for the first time. Glazer did not know what to expect. I don't think he quite knew how beloved Armstrong was. So according to the promoter, Ernie Anderson, he said when they were flying over, Glazer was telling him, remember, Pops, don't sing. They're not going to understand it. Don't sing. They don't understand English. Whatever you do, don't sing. And apparently Armstrong would just nod his head. And at every concert, the first song he would sing every night was "What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue?" And so that was a track that he originally recorded in 1929. It's now become history. It's known as the first protest song. He performed it for a number of years in the early 30s, but by the mid-30s, it seems to have fallen out of his repertoire. So going back to the All-Stars years now, digging Black and Blue out and making that the first song, the first statement, especially in these European countries, is pretty deep. So once again, same band, same broadcast. Here is What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue?
Wished I was dead. What did I do to be so black and blue? Even the mouse ran from my house. They laugh at you and scorn you too. What did I do to be so black and blue? I'm white inside, that don't help my case. 'Cause I can't hide what is in my face. How would it end? Ain't got a friend. My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue?
And for me, Barney Bigard is just amazing on clarinet throughout that whole song.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. And Barney, if you knew Barney's work with the All-Stars, he kind of ran out of gas as the years went on. In the mid-50s sometimes, it sounds almost like he's kind of going through the motions. But here, I mean, everybody is so excited to be playing together, and it just jumps out of the grooves. So that's the French material. The other half of the CD skips to Germany in 1952, and a lot had changed by this point. The All-Stars became this incredible box office attraction. Big Sid Catlett was the first to go. He actually had health problems and passed away in 1951. So Cozy Cole came in, phenomenal drummer. Arvell Shaw left for about a year in 51 to study music out in Switzerland, but he came back in the summer of 52. Earl Hines left to form his own band again, and so they tried bringing in Joe Sullivan on piano, but it didn't quite work out. So they ended up getting Marty Napoleon, marvelous musician. And then, as I mentioned, Barney was already running out of gas, and they had this European tour coming. And so Barney decided to bow out for about 6 months. So they got a great clarinetist from Texas, Bob McCracken, and that just left the trombone chair. Jack Teagarden and Lewis were soul brothers. They just loved each other. And Teagarden left in 51, and he was replaced by a great trombonist named Russ Phillips. Armstrong actually handpicked Phillips. He was from Denver. But trying to fill Jack Teagarden's shoes was not easy. And so in March of 52, Armstrong and the All-Stars were in Hawaii, and they ran into Trummy Young, the great trombonist from the Jimmy Lunsford Band. He had recorded with Charlie Parker and Benny Goodman and everybody else. And they hit it off. We have some private tapes of Armstrong and Trummy in Hawaii, just, you know, taking over radio shows, and their big catchphrase during the trip was "Aloha, ya all," and they would just crack up. So immediately the bond was there, and Lewis wanted Trummy to join the band right then and there, but Trummy had a gig, he had a family, he couldn't do it. But in September of 52, he joined the All-Stars. He stayed for almost 12 years. He really became Lewis's best friend in the band. So he joined the band in September. His first night in the band was right on national TV, live TV on the Jackie Gleason show. And the very next day, they left for Europe, this big major European tour. And so on October 12th, the All-Stars ended up in Berlin for the first time. Armstrong had never been there, so now it's post-World War II, West Berlin. And this concert had a deep impact on Armstrong. He talked about it for years because he always mentioned that after the show, he was bombarded in the dressing room by fans from East Berlin, fans from Russia. They had all gotten around the Berlin Wall, around the Iron Curtain. And Armstrong asked them afterwards, you know, how are you getting back? And they said, we don't know. And it really hit him. Like, yeah, these kids were putting their lives on the line because, yeah, Armstrong represented so much as a symbol, as a musician, and they just wanted to be there. So this was his very first time there, recorded for German radio. And as you'll hear in a moment, technology had improved immensely. Tape, reel-to-reel tape was now the norm. The recordings from France were all done on acetate disc, so they just have that natural kind of surface noise. But reel-to-reel tape, you can't beat that. And so this is almost similar to the Josta Hagelhoff collection. There's a man in Germany named Winfried Meyer who's still with us. I think he's 83 now. 3 years ago, for his 80th birthday, he decided to give us his entire Armstrong in Germany collection. He met Louis in Germany in '59 just as a fan. They hit it off. By '61, they were getting drunk at the airport together. Winfried became Louis's driver. They took photos together, and from that moment until the end of Louis's life, they traded cards and letters, and Winfried saved everything. But then he went the extra mile and collected everything he could about Armstrong in Germany, concert programs, photographs, and everything else. So I've gotten to know him just as a pen pal, but I asked him, I said, this concert, because when he donated the collection, there was a reel-to-reel tape. And he said, yeah, he goes, I'm sure it's fine. The station is out of business, and Jerry had to deal with the Armstrong Foundation that we could pretty much do what we wanted. Yeah, so this was a natural choice. So the CD has 7 selections from Germany. But do you want to give them a preview of what's still to come?
Well, we have some extra cuts in at the end of September. We're just going to take the German show from Berlin and put out a LP, probably about 42 minutes of the stuff. So there'll be a couple of extra songs. But the fidelity is really great, as you'll hear. Mm-hmm. And this is really an outstanding show.
Yeah. So, again, it's capturing the all-stars in transition. Trummy's first night, Marty Napoleon on piano, Cozy on drums, Arvell's back in the saddle, Bob McCracken on clarinet. Velma sings a few. But I chose a track that Armstrong, if you ever seen the film Satchmo the Great, he always told a story, and the story's hysterical. He would always say that when they started playing in Berlin, he said a lot of people that were very reserved. He said there were people in the audience with lorgnettes, holding them up to their eyes. And then he said, then we launched into Bucket's Got a Hole in It. He goes, all of a sudden he looked out there and he said, the lorgnettes came down. Everybody was like, yeah, daddy. And they all started clapping. And so this is that moment, so feel free to shout, yeah, daddy. And here's The Bucket's Got a Hole in It.
Yes, sir. We want to drink one of them good old recordings we just played. And it's a tune called The Bucket's Got a Hole in It. Yes, sir. Got a hole in it. The bucket's got a hole in it. The bucket's got a hole in it. And we can't buy no more beer. Yeah, the bucket's got a hole in it. Yeah, man, the bucket's got a hole in it. The bucket's got a hole in it. Somebody better run your spec. Come here, Bob.
Keep a knocking and you can't come in.
Bob McCracken on vocal.
Keep a knocking and you can't come in. We close at 9 and nights after 10. Honey, won't you please call again?
Daddy. And if you know your bucket's got a hole in it, it's slower than normal. That's one of the first live versions that ever survived. It's one of those things bands get something in the repertoire and it gradually speeds up by the years. So that's the real stuff right there. And you can hear the fidelity's great, the crowd's great, the band's great. Just a tremendous performance. Should we play one more from?
Yeah, we can play one more. We on the nightclubs, we played a version of this song, "A Kiss to Build a Dream On," from San Francisco with Billie Holiday
in the audience.
Yeah, and Lewis dedicating it to her. But this was an outstanding version, so we decided to put this on here as well.
Yeah, can't have too many versions of "A Kiss to Build a Dream On." So once again, from Berlin.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, folks. Here's a good one coming up. A little "Kiss to Build a Dream On" for ya. A kiss to build a dream on, and my imagination will thrive up on that kiss. Yes, sweetheart, I ask no more than this. Kiss to build a dream on, my purpose is done. Yes, give me one kiss before you leave me, and my imagination to feed my hungry heart. Yes, give me one thing before we part. I guess the been dream on. When I'm alone with my fancies, I'll be with you. Yes, weaving romances, making believe the truth. Yes, give me your lips for just a moment, and my imagination will make that moment live. Babe, give me what you alone can give. I kiss the bell, the dream on. I'm alone with my fancies. Yes, I be with you. Oh, weaving romances, making believe they're true. Yes, lend me your chops for just a moment, and my imagination will make that moment live. Yes, give me what you alone can give. I can't stop in the dreamer.
Lend me your chops for just a moment. No German translation for that. So, I mean, you've heard 4. There's 16 cuts on the CD, so there's a lot more, and a lot more from Berlin for the vinyl freaks out there coming out in September. I don't mean that in a disparaging way.
Right. We have a bunch of stuff, just so many things that we just kind of riff off, and Ricky's like, what about this? And I'm like, yeah, but what about that? So eventually there'll be more from Europe, Oslo and Italy.
Yeah.
And but for next year, hopefully for Satchmo Fest, we'll have a 2 CD Louis Armstrong live in New Orleans from 4 different shows. 49,
52, 55, and 68. Yeah.
So that's what we'll
Jerry's
be doing.
just looking for another reason to get
Yeah,
back.
exactly. See, it's the only reason. I just keep putting this out.
No, I mean, there's really no end in sight. You know, we hope this series runs forevermore. I mean, I just want to get on my soapbox for a minute because, you know, I made a joke before, but the reason why this CD is European-centric, and the music speaks for itself, but these CDs, if I divulge the sales figures, are doing beautifully in
Europe. It's sad that in America, which this is our music, it doesn't sell nearly as well as it does in Europe. And they're fanatical about it. And we have Dot Time has an office in Bremen, Germany, and in late April they have the jazz conference there, and it's amazing how many people just come up to me and want to know when the next Armstrong's coming out, because the sales figures are just amazing over there compared to here. It's probably 5 to 1, maybe even 6 to 1.
Yeah.
So it's kind of embarrassing here that, you know, it's Armstrong, probably the greatest musician of all time, and people here don't appreciate him as much as people do over there. I mean, it's really fervent.
Yeah. And the jazz media here does not make it any. We're not going to have many friends after this, but yeah, we might have talked about this last year. But Downbeat reviewed the first volume and gave how many was it 4.5 stars? 4-star review. Who can argue with a 4-star review until you read the review and they clearly didn't listen to the CD? They actually named songs that weren't on it, and we're like, oh, it's the same kind of All Stars thing, but it wasn't, and. There's still something out there where people take Armstrong for granted, and it drives me up a wall.
And I had just gotten off the plane to go to this conference, the Jazz Ahead conference in Bremen, and you hear the term, my phone blew up. I literally turned my phone on off of airplane mode as we were pulling in, and my phone is just like jumping. And it was Ricky saying that...
Angry about a 4-star review. How dare they?
And he's like, you have to talk to them right now. And I'm like, I'll, as soon as I get off the plane.
Yeah. But they rectified. They gave us a little preview, which Jazz Times hasn't reviewed any of them, right? I don't think this. We put it 3 volumes, not even a review, not even a lousy review.
And one of the things for Downbeat that was really good for us was the nightclubs, which Ricky and I, it was a real labor of love. But the critics, it wasn't even on their radar.
The polls.
But the readers voted it number 3 historical recording of the year last year. And we lost to like Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Bill Evans.
Bums.
So, right. So we have more hope for Armstrong in the future, but he's number 3 in holding.
Well, the same thing happened. Scott Wenzel and I, we did a Mosaic set in 2014, and the critics poll, I don't even think it landed on there, but it won, and it was number 1 in the readers poll. So Pops is the people's champion. I've never seen anything like it anywhere else, where the guy who basically wrote the rules, is totally neglected by the polls. Imagine, this is ridiculous now, I can't believe this. Imagine the church is going to have a critics poll, and Jesus isn't even in the top 10. It's like, who are they voting for? Who are they voting for at a certain point? They're voting Oh, not for you.
We spoke about this briefly on OZ this morning. You don't have the original acetates.
No.
But the sound quality on it, it's quarter-inch tape? Is that what you're getting it from?
No, we had a combination of CD, DAT tape, and cassette tape. Yeah. The German stuff is quarter-inch tape.
Yeah.
No, that's
You could tell the difference, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, you have any other comments, Mr. Weisenheimer?
Mr. Mosaic producer.
Yeah. Security? Can we throw out the man in the front row? I will not be pestered. I don't know.
But you'll be working with him again tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay. Never mind. We're lucky to be doing this, and we're lucky we have, this is the hippest room in the world, Newport Jazz Festival. That's going on right now.
Well, we as .time are, I said this last year, if you can't get excited about Louis Armstrong after talking to Ricky for 5 minutes, it can't happen.
If you can't get excited listening to Louis Armstrong, period, you should be shot. I'm getting in trouble today. No, all right. Let's see. What do we got? We're out of time. We have like 4 minutes. Any questions? Any comments? Anybody want to start a fight? Yes, sir, Mr.
I have to ask this, I think you can put it to bed, but I have to know. Is the American market been overtaken by streaming, which would affect sales, not just people not paying attention to Armstrong?
That's part of it, but it's still the streaming in Europe is still higher than it is in America.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones we don't play anymore, they're listening to.
They still are listening to
Yeah.
it, yeah.
I would like to thank Bad Andy, who just walked by, the human screensaver, who, if anyone, he kept us afloat. Thank you, Bad Andy. Bad Andy, yes, sir. One more question. Time Records. Yep, and the Louis Armstrong House Museum.
That's the house in
Queens.
Corona.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it there on my bucket list.
I'll be waiting for you.
Except Mondays.
And don't come on Monday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday. I work a short schedule. Oh, that's a subject for. The question was, did Armstrong ever come back to New Orleans? I'll give you the 40-second version. He leaves in 1922. The first time back was in 1931. He spent 3 months here. That's a major subject of his life. But then after that, he comes back mostly just as a stop on the tour. A few tours are bigger than others. 49, he's king of the Zulus. Yeah, so much has been written about that. But in the mid-50s, Louisiana passed a law prohibiting integrated bands from performing in public, and Armstrong's band was integrated. So he stayed away from New Orleans between February 55 and October 65. He didn't even step foot in the city. And 2 years before he died, he wrote about it, how New Orleans was always disgustingly segregated. And in 1970, he gave an interview in which he said after he left, he got northern-fied. And he said he forgot about a lot of that foolishness down there. So New Orleans was the most important time of his life. A day didn't go by where he didn't write about it, play songs, sing about it. But he also, he stayed away. I should also mention the man literally right next to you has done more work on Armstrong's return. Bjorn Barnheim here has devoted his life to documenting every time Armstrong stepped foot back home after 1922. So thank you for your work, Bjorn, and talk to him because he's got all the answers. We good? We cool? We're good?
We're good.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be back.